Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of English Listening Practice with Sarah and Alex. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Alex. We're so glad you could join us today. If you're new here, this podcast is all about helping you improve your English listening skills in a relaxed, conversational way. We're just two friends having a chat about different topics, and hopefully, you'll learn something new along the way.
Yeah, we like to keep it fun, light, and relatable. So grab a cup of tea or coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Today, we're going to dive into something that's really helpful for English learners: how to practice and improve your listening skills effectively.
This is one of the key skills when learning any language. But English, in particular, has a lot of nuances, accents, and idiomatic expressions that can make it tricky.
Exactly. Plus, with English being such a global language, you hear different accents all the time. So, today we're going to cover some tips and ideas that we've found helpful, both from personal experience and from what we know about language learning in general.
Sounds great. So, Sarah, let's kick things off. What would you say is the most important thing for people to remember when they're trying to improve their English listening?
I'd say patience is key. You have to be patient with yourself. Listening comprehension doesn't improve overnight. It takes time and consistency. You need to expose yourself to the language as much as possible. And that means listening to all kinds of content: conversations, stories, interviews, and even things like the news or movies.
Definitely. I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, right? They expect that after listening to a few things, they'll suddenly be fluent in understanding everything. But it's really a gradual process.
Exactly. And sometimes it can be frustrating when you feel like you're not understanding much. But even if it feels that way, you're still absorbing the language. Over time, you'll start to pick up on more words and phrases.
Yeah, it's like training your ear. You might not notice the progress at first, but it's happening. I always tell people to start with something simple. Don't try to listen to really fast or complex English at the beginning.
Right? Right. I think one good way to start is with children's shows or educational videos, because the language is usually slower and clearer. You can also find podcasts or audiobooks that are specifically aimed at language learners, which are typically spoken more slowly and use simpler vocabulary.
That's a great point. Another tip I'd add is to focus on topics that you're already interested in. If you love sports, listen to interviews with athletes or sports commentary. If you're into cooking, there are plenty of cooking shows or podcasts that talk about food.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you listen to something you enjoy, it doesn't feel like work and you're more likely to stay engaged with it.
For sure. And I think there's also this misconception that you need to understand everything when you listen. That's not the case at all. In the beginning, you might only catch a few words, but as you continue, you'll start to recognize more. The key is not to get discouraged when you don't understand something.
Oh, that's such an important point. When I was learning Spanish, I remember listening to conversations and only catching maybe 30% of what was being said. But over time, I started to catch more. It was all about keeping at it.
Yeah, and another thing I've noticed is that if you listen actively, you'll get more out of it. So instead of just letting the audio play in the background while you're doing something else, try to really focus on it. You can take notes or even try to repeat what the speakers are saying.
Absolutely. And speaking of active listening, one technique that I really like is shadowing. That's when you listen to a phrase or a sentence and then you try to repeat it right after. It's like you're shadowing the speaker. It helps with both listening and speaking.
Oh, I've done that before. It's such a good exercise because you're not only training your ear, but you're also practicing the rhythm and intonation of the language.
Exactly. It helps with pronunciation too. Plus, it forces you to really focus on what the speaker is saying. You can do this with TV shows, podcasts, or even news segments.
Right, and if you combine shadowing with transcripts or subtitles, it can be even more effective. Sometimes seeing the words while you hear them makes it easier to understand and remember.
Yes, and that's another tip: using subtitles. If you're watching a show or a movie, start with subtitles in your native language. Then, when you feel more confident, switch to English subtitles. Eventually, try watching without any subtitles at all.
Exactly. And I think it's also good to remember that listening to different accents is important too. English is spoken all over the world, and there are so many different ways people pronounce words. British English, American English, Australian English, South African English, they all sound a bit different.
Oh, totally. Sometimes people get really used to one accent, and then when they hear another one, it throws them off completely. So, it's good to mix it up and listen to different types of English speakers.
Yeah, I had a friend who was learning English, and she had only been listening to American English. When she first heard a British accent, she thought it was a completely different language. But after some practice, she got used to it.
That's funny, but it happens. I remember the first time I watched an Australian TV show, I had to rewind a few times to understand what was being said because the accent was so different from what I was used to.
Right. So, if you're listening and something seems hard to understand, don't worry. It's probably just a different accent or way of speaking. But with time, your ear will adjust.
And that brings up another point. Don't be afraid to rewind or replay something if you don't catch it the first time. I do that all the time when I'm watching something in another language.
Oh, me too. There's no shame in going back and listening again. It's actually a really good way to reinforce what you're learning.
For sure. And you can even slow down the audio if it's too fast. Most audio players or video platforms have that option. You can slow it down by 10 or 20% without it sounding too weird.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful feature. Sometimes native speakers talk really fast, and slowing it down just a little can make all the difference.
Definitely. So, to recap a bit, patience is key. Start with simple content, listen to things you enjoy, and don't be afraid to rewind or slow things down.
And don't worry about understanding everything right away. Focus on getting the general idea first, and over time, you'll start catching more details.
Also, mix up the types of content you listen to: podcasts, audiobooks, TV shows, interviews, whatever you can find, and expose yourself to different accents.
Oh, and shadowing. Don't forget shadowing. It's such a good exercise for both listening and speaking practice.
Definitely. And remember, practice makes a progress. The more you listen, the better you'll get.
Yeah, and have fun with it. Learning a language should be an enjoyable experience.
You know what, Alex? I think we can keep going a little longer. There's just so much to cover when it comes to improving listening skills, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
You're right, Sarah. We've given some great tips, but there's always more to explore. Let's dive deeper into a few more techniques and ideas that our listeners can use. How about we talk about the importance of context and background knowledge when listening?
Oh, that's a good one. Sometimes people focus so much on individual words that they forget how important context is. If you have some background knowledge about the topic you're listening to, it can help you understand the overall message, even if you don't know every single word.
Exactly. Like if you're listening to a podcast about travel and you already know a little about the destination they're talking about, you'll have a better chance of understanding the conversation. It's almost like your brain fills in the gaps.
Right. It's all about making connections. For example, if someone is talking about airport security, you might not catch every word, but if you've been through an airport before, you'll probably understand the gist of what's being said. You can predict what might come next based on your experience.
Yeah, and I think this is where reading can also help your listening. If you read about a topic before listening to a podcast or watching a video on the same subject, you'll be more prepared. Your brain will already have some vocabulary and concepts stored up, so it'll be easier to follow along.
Oh, absolutely. Reading and listening work together so well. That's why I always recommend combining the two. If you know you're going to listen to something about a particular subject, try to read an article or blog post about it first.
And if you're watching something with subtitles, you could try reading the subtitles in English as you listen. That way, you're improving both your reading and listening skills at the same time.
Exactly. It's like a double workout for your brain. But there's also something to be said for learning to listen without relying too much on written text, right?
Yeah, that's a big step for many learners. It can feel like taking off the training wheels, but it's so important to build that confidence. I think one way to do that is to listen to content that's just slightly above your level, something challenging but not overwhelming.
That's a good point. It's like finding that sweet spot where it's not too easy, but not so hard that you get frustrated and give up. I think podcasts like this one are great for that because we try to speak clearly and naturally without using overly complicated vocabulary.
Exactly. And that brings up another idea. Don't forget about repetition. Sometimes listening to the same content more than once can really help. You might catch something the second or third time that you missed before.
Oh, absolutely. Repetition is one of the most powerful tools for language learning. If you listen to something once and don't understand everything, don't feel bad about replaying it. Each time, you'll understand a little more.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the first time you listen, you might be focused on understanding the basic meaning. But when you listen again, you can start picking up on details, like the way certain words are pronounced or how phrases are connected.
Exactly. And that ties into listening for different purposes. The first time you listen, you might just be trying to get the main idea. Then, the next time, you can focus on the details like vocabulary or grammar structures.
Oh, speaking of grammar, that's something we should talk about too. A lot of learners think they need to know perfect grammar to understand spoken English, but that's not always the case.
Right. In everyday conversations, people don't always speak in perfectly formed sentences. They use contractions, slang, and sometimes leave out words, especially in casual speech.
Yeah, exactly. Native speakers often don't follow the textbook rules when they talk, so you can't expect to hear perfect grammar all the time. But that's actually a good thing because it helps you learn how real people speak.
It does. I think it's important to expose yourself to natural, unscripted speech as much as possible. Watching interviews or reality shows, for example, can give you a better idea of how people really communicate in everyday life.
Definitely. And even though grammar is important, I think understanding the flow of conversation, the rhythm and intonation, is just as critical for listening comprehension.
Oh, yes. Intonation is huge. In English, the way we stress certain words in a sentence can completely change the meaning. For example, if I say, I didn't say he stole the money, with emphasis on he, I'm implying someone else might have done it.
Exactly. And if you don't pay attention to that, you could totally miss what the speaker is trying to convey. So, listening for intonation and stress is something learners should focus on too.
Absolutely. And to practice that, I'd recommend listening to short dialogues or conversations where you can really concentrate on how words are emphasized. Then try mimicking those patterns.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we mentioned earlier, shadowing. When you mimic the speaker, you're not just copying the words, but also their intonation and rhythm.
Right. And if you do that enough, it'll start to feel more natural. It's almost like developing a musical ear for the language. You begin to recognize the music of English.
I love that analogy. English really does have its own melody, and once you start to pick up on that, it becomes a lot easier to understand what people are saying, even if you don't catch every single word.
Exactly. And that brings me to another thought. Don't be afraid of silence. Pausing during a conversation to think and process what you've heard is perfectly fine. In fact, it's a great way to make sure you're really absorbing the information.
Oh, that's so true. I think sometimes learners feel like they need to keep up with the speed of the conversation and end up missing key parts because they're rushing. Taking a moment to reflect or even to ask for clarification is totally okay.
Yes, if you don't understand something, there's nothing wrong with asking the speaker to repeat or explain it. Most people are happy to help, especially if they know you're learning.
And asking questions shows that you're actively engaged in the conversation, which is a good thing. It's better to ask and understand than to pretend you're following along when you're not.
Definitely. And you can even prepare some useful phrases ahead of time, like, could you say that again, please? Or, what does that mean? That way, you're ready when you need to clarify something.
Exactly. So, between using context, focusing on intonation, shadowing, repeating content, and asking for clarification, there are so many strategies you can use to improve your listening skills.
Right. And remember, everyone learns at their own pace. The key is to keep practicing regularly, and before you know it, you'll notice real progress.
Definitely. The more you listen, the better you'll get. And don't forget to have fun with it.
Some questions and detailed explanations of the answers related to English listening practice based on the conversation between Sarah and Alex.
Why is context important in English listening practice?
Context plays a crucial role in understanding spoken English because it provides background information that helps you make sense of what is being said, even if you don't know every word. When you have context or background knowledge on a topic, your brain can predict what might come next in the conversation, filling in gaps in your understanding. For instance, if you're listening to a conversation about airport security and you've been through an airport before, you can use that experience to understand more of what is being said. This reduces the need to understand every individual word because the overall meaning becomes clearer based on your prior knowledge. Explanation. Context provides clues about what the conversation is likely to be about. Without it, every word becomes equally important, which can be overwhelming. But when you understand the setting, topic, or situation, it becomes easier to focus on the main points rather than getting stuck on unfamiliar vocabulary. This is why it's recommended to read or learn a bit about a topic before listening to related content.
How can shadowing improve your listening skills?
Shadowing is a technique where you listen to a native speaker and immediately repeat what they say, trying to match their pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. This method helps improve listening comprehension because it trains you to focus on how words are spoken, not just what is said. It also forces you to listen carefully for details like stress patterns and sentence flow, which can enhance both your listening and speaking skills over time. Explanation. When you shadow, you are mimicking the way native speakers use the language, which helps train your ear to notice the nuances in pronunciation and intonation. This is essential because understanding spoken English isn't just about knowing the words, it's about recognizing how those words sound in natural speech. Shadowing also boosts speaking confidence as you get used to the pace and rhythm of fluent speakers, making you more comfortable with listening to and producing English sounds.
What are some benefits of listening to audio content at different speeds?
Listening to audio content at different speeds can challenge and enhance your listening skills. When you slow down the audio, it helps you catch words or phrases you might miss at regular speed. Once you're comfortable, listening at a faster speed, like 1.25x or 1.5x, can improve your ability to comprehend spoken English at a natural or even rapid pace. When you return to normal speed, the conversation will feel slower and easier to understand. Explanation. Slowing down audio. What are some benefits of listening to audio content at different speeds? English. It's like training your brain to work faster so that when you return to regular speed, understanding becomes more automatic. This flexibility in listening practice is key to building up your listening endurance and fluency.
Why is repetition important in listening practice?
Repetition is important because it helps reinforce what you've heard, allowing you to gradually pick up more details with each listen. The first time you hear something, you might only understand the general idea, but with repeated listening, you can focus on specific vocabulary, pronunciation, or grammar points. Over time, this repeated exposure strengthens your listening comprehension and retention. Explanation. Our brains need multiple exposures to new information to truly retain it. When you listen to the same audio multiple times, each repetition allows you to notice something new. For example, the first time you might focus on understanding the main topic, but the second time you can concentrate on how specific words are pronounced or how sentences are constructed. This process helps embed new vocabulary and grammar into your memory, making you a better listener overall.
What is the role of background knowledge in improving listening skills?
Background knowledge provides a framework for understanding spoken English. When you have some familiarity with the topic being discussed, it's easier to follow along because your brain can predict and fill in the gaps. This allows you to focus more on listening to how things are said rather than getting stuck on individual unfamiliar words. Explanation. Imagine listening to a podcast about a topic you know nothing about, like advanced physics. Even if your English is strong, it would be difficult to follow the conversation because the concepts and vocabulary are unfamiliar. However, if you already know a bit about physics, you'll be able to follow along more easily because you can relate what you hear to what you already know. In this way, background knowledge acts as a support system, making it easier to comprehend new information.
What is the importance of listening for intonation and stress in English?
Intonation and stress are critical elements of English listening because they can change the meaning of a sentence or indicate the speaker's emotions. For example, stressing different words in a sentence can alter the meaning entirely. Listening for these cues helps you understand not only the words, but also the speaker's intent, mood, and emphasis, which is important for grasping the full meaning of a conversation. Explanation. In English, the same sentence can mean different things depending on which words are stressed. For instance, I didn't say he stole the money can mean different things depending on where the emphasis is placed. If you stress he, it suggests that someone else might have stolen the money. Intonation, or the rise and fall of voice pitch, also signals whether a sentence is a question, statement, or exclamation. Paying attention to these elements helps you interpret the message correctly and respond appropriately in conversations.
Why is it okay to ask for clarification when you don't understand something in a conversation?
It's perfectly fine to ask for clarification because it ensures you fully understand the conversation. Asking for repetition or explanation shows that you're engaged and eager to learn, and it helps avoid misunderstandings. Native speakers are usually happy to clarify, and doing so improves your confidence and helps reinforce your learning. Explanation. In a real conversation, it's common not to understand everything, especially when learning a new language. By asking for clarification, you create opportunities to hear the information again and to understand it better the second time around. It also teaches you to be an active listener, which is a crucial skill in language learning. This habit can also help you build relationships with speakers because it demonstrates interest and attentiveness.
How can practicing with native speakers improve your listening skills?
Practicing with native speakers improves listening skills by exposing you to natural, everyday English. Native speakers use real-life conversational patterns, including slang, idiomatic expressions, and natural pacing, which helps you adjust to the flow of the language. Engaging in conversation with native speakers also provides immediate feedback, allowing you to ask questions and clarify anything you don't understand in real time. Explanation. Listening to native speakers allows you to experience the language as it's used in real life, which is often different from what you might hear in textbooks or scripted audio. Conversational practice exposes you to the informal, spontaneous elements of English that are crucial for becoming fluent, like how people shorten words, combine sounds, and use body language or facial expressions. It also helps build your listening endurance, making it easier to follow longer, more complex conversations.
How can thinking in English improve your listening comprehension?
Thinking in English helps improve listening comprehension because it trains your brain to process the language more naturally. Instead of translating from your native language, you begin to understand English directly, which makes it easier to follow conversations in real time. This shift reduces the mental load and allows you to focus on listening to and understanding the overall message, rather than getting caught up in word for word translation. Explanation: when you think in English, you eliminate the extra step of translating from your native language, which speeds up your comprehension. This is crucial when listening to spoken English because conversations move quickly, and there isn't always time to translate every word. Thinking in English allows you to process the language more efficiently, making it easier to understand both the content and the nuances of what's being said.
How can watching English TV shows or movies without subtitles improve your listening skills?
Watching English TV shows or movies without subtitles forces you to rely solely on your listening skills, helping you to better understand how English is spoken naturally. It trains you to focus on the dialogue, the tone, and the body language of the actors to comprehend the meaning. This practice also improves your ability to understand different accents, slang, and informal language. Explanation: when you watch without subtitles, your brain has to work harder to interpret what's being said. While subtitles can be helpful in learning, relying on them too much may prevent you from fully engaging your listening skills. Watching without them immerses you in the language, allowing you to focus on sounds, context, and nonverbal cues, which are key to understanding spoken English in real world settings. Over time, this improves your ability to process spoken English more quickly and effectively.
Why is listening to a variety of accents important for improving listening skills?
Listening to a variety of accents is important because English is spoken with many different regional and international accents. By exposing yourself to various accents, such as British, American, Australian, and others, you train your ear to recognize words and phrases, despite differences in pronunciation, intonation, or rhythm. This helps you become a more versatile listener. Explanation: English is a global language, and understanding speakers from different countries and regions is essential if you want to be truly proficient. Each accent has unique characteristics, like how certain vowels are pronounced or how stress is placed on words. If you only listen to one type of accent, you may struggle when hearing someone from another region. By regularly listening to different accents, you build the ability to understand a wide range of speakers, regardless of their origin.
What role does active listening play in improving English listening skills?
Active listening is crucial in improving English listening skills because it involves fully concentrating, understanding, and responding to what you hear, rather than just passively receiving the information. It helps you engage more deeply with the content, which enhances comprehension and retention. Active listening also involves paying attention to verbal and nonverbal cues, such as tone, emotion, and emphasis, which contribute to understanding the speaker's full message. Explanation: when you actively listen, you are not just hearing words, but processing their meaning, structure, and context. This involves focusing on the conversation without distractions, asking questions if needed, and mentally summarizing what you've heard. Active listening encourages you to interact with the content, which strengthens your ability to understand and remember what you've learned. This kind of engagement also helps with recognizing patterns in speech and language use.
How can listening to news broadcasts help improve your English listening skills?
Listening to news broadcasts can improve your English listening skills by exposing you to formal and structured language. News reports often use clear pronunciation and a variety of topics, making them an excellent resource for expanding vocabulary and improving comprehension. Additionally, news broadcasts usually follow a predictable format, which helps you become familiar with certain types of speech, like reporting, interviews, and commentary. Explanation: news broadcasts are often delivered at a moderate pace with clear diction, making them ideal for listening practice. The variety of topics discussed in the news, from politics and economy to entertainment and sports, introduces you to new vocabulary and different ways of expressing ideas. Furthermore, listening to news anchors, who generally speak more formally and clearly, helps you adjust to different registers of English. Over time, this can improve both your understanding of complex topics and your ability to follow structured speech.
What is the importance of recognizing keywords and phrases in listening practice?
Recognizing keywords and phrases is important because they act as anchor points that help you understand the main ideas of what is being said. Even if you don't understand every single word, identifying the key terms allows you to piece together the overall meaning of a conversation or speech. Keywords often signal important information, while filler words can usually be ignored. Explanation: in real life conversations, it's common not to catch every word. However, by recognizing important keywords like nouns, verbs, or specific topic related vocabulary, you can still grasp the main points. For example, in a conversation about traveling, hearing words like airport, flight, delayed, or passport can help you understand the context, even if you miss some of the connecting words. Practicing this skill trains your brain to focus on what's essential and ignore unimportant details, which is a vital skill in fast paced or complex listening situations.
How does using transcripts alongside audio content help improve listening skills?
Using transcripts alongside audio content helps improve listening skills by allowing you to read along as you listen, which reinforces your understanding of spoken words. This technique can clarify pronunciation, help you catch words you might have missed, and solidify your understanding of grammar and sentence structure in real time. It's a great way to bridge the gap between listening and reading comprehension. Explanation: when you listen and read at the same time, your brain makes connections between the written and spoken forms of the language. This helps you recognize words and phrases more easily the next time you hear them. Transcripts are particularly useful for complex audio where certain words may be unfamiliar or spoken quickly. By checking the transcript, you can verify what you've heard and improve your ability to distinguish words in future listening situations. Over time, this can significantly boost both your vocabulary and your listening comprehension.
How does recording and listening to yourself speaking improve your listening skills?
Recording and listening to yourself speaking improves your listening skills by allowing you to hear your own pronunciation, intonation, and pacing. It helps you identify areas where you may need improvement, such as mispronounced words or awkward pauses, and allows you to compare your speech to native speakers. This self assessment strengthens both your speaking and listening abilities. Explanation: when you listen to a recording of yourself, you hear the language from a new perspective, your own. This process helps you notice whether you're producing sounds correctly and whether your speech flows naturally. Comparing your recordings to native speech allows you to see where your pronunciation differs and what you can work on. The more you practice this, the better you'll get at both producing and understanding spoken English, as it trains your ear to notice the differences between your speech and native speakers' speech.
What is the benefit of narrating your day in English for listening practice?
Narrating your day in English is a great way to improve listening skills because it makes you think in English and internalize the language. When you talk to yourself in English, you practice forming sentences and using vocabulary relevant to everyday situations. If you record these narrations and listen to them later, you can assess how natural your speech sounds and make adjustments. Explanation: by narrating your daily activities, you're engaging with English in a natural, low pressure way. You might say, I'm making breakfast, or I'm walking to the store, which helps reinforce the language structures needed for casual conversation. If you then listen back to your narration, you can check for pronunciation or grammar errors and see where you need to improve. This habit of thinking in English also makes listening easier because it gets your brain used to processing English in real time without needing to translate from your native language.
How can you improve your listening comprehension by listening to conversations between native speakers?
Listening to conversations between native speakers helps improve your listening comprehension because it exposes you to authentic, spontaneous speech, including natural rhythms, slang, and informal language. It trains your ear to understand how native speakers interact in real life settings, which is different from scripted or formal content. This practice also helps you pick up on conversational cues like pauses, tone changes, and filler words. Explanation: conversations between native speakers often include elements like faster pacing, informal expressions, and abbreviations that aren't found in textbooks or more formal listening exercises. By listening to real life dialogues, you learn how to follow the flow of a natural conversation, which often includes interruptions, overlapping speech, and incomplete sentences. This exposure builds your ability to comprehend spontaneous speech, making it easier to understand native speakers in everyday situations like casual chats or phone calls.
How does patience and consistency contribute to improving listening skills in English?
Patience and consistency are key to improving listening skills because language learning is a gradual process. It takes time for your brain to adjust to understanding a new language, especially in its spoken form. Consistently practicing listening, even if only for a few minutes each day, gradually improves your comprehension and builds your confidence. Being patient with yourself helps you stay motivated through challenges. Explanation: like any skill, improving your listening abilities in English requires regular practice. Listening to English every day, even if it's just for a short time, allows your brain to become more familiar with the sounds, structures, and vocabulary of the language. It's important to be patient and recognize that you won't become fluent overnight. There will be moments when you don't understand something, and that's okay. The key is to keep practicing consistently. Each small step contributes to long-term improvement. You know, Alex, there's actually one more thing I'd love to talk about before we wrap up for real. We didn't really touch on how technology can play a role in improving your listening skills, besides just listening to podcasts like ours, of course.
Oh, yeah, good point. I think using technology can be a game changer for language learners. There are so many tools and methods you can use to practice. Where do you want to start?
I think voice recording is a great place to begin. It's a simple but effective way to improve your listening and speaking skills at the same time. You can record yourself speaking, then listen back to identify areas where you can improve, whether it's pronunciation, intonation, or even how you structure your sentences.
Oh, totally. When you hear yourself speaking, it's like holding up a mirror to your progress. And comparing your own voice to native speakers can help you notice those subtle differences in pronunciation and rhythm that might need some work.
Exactly. It might feel awkward at first to listen to yourself, but it's such a valuable tool. Plus, you can track your progress over time. Record yourself today and then listen to that recording a few months later. You'll likely hear a big difference.
Yeah, it's motivating to hear how much you've improved. And you don't need any fancy equipment. Just use your phone to record. Another thing you can do is practice dictation. Listen to a short clip of audio and try writing down everything you hear.
Yes, dictation is great because it forces you to really focus on each word, and it helps with spelling and grammar too. You can start with short, simple audio clips and then work your way up to longer, more complex ones.
Exactly. And it's a good test of your comprehension. If you miss something, you can replay the audio. And eventually, you'll get better at catching those tricky words or phrases. Another tip I like is to slow down the playback speed when you're working on dictation. You don't want to overwhelm yourself if the speaker is talking too fast.
Yeah, we touched on slowing down audio earlier, but it's worth mentioning again. Slowing things down is such a helpful trick, especially for beginners. But once you're more confident, you can challenge yourself by increasing the speed a little.
Oh, that's an excellent point. Once you're comfortable at a normal pace, try listening at 1.25x or even 1.5x speed. It's a great way to push your listening skills, because when you switch back to regular speed, it'll feel slower and easier to understand.
Exactly. And if you're feeling adventurous, you can try listening to something without subtitles or a transcript for the first time. Just jump in and see how much you can understand. Then go back and listen with subtitles or a transcript to fill in the gaps.
Oh, that's a fun challenge. And it's a good confidence booster when you realize how much you actually understood on your own. Plus, it trains you to focus on the overall meaning instead of getting stuck on individual words.
Right. Speaking of transcripts, that's another tech tool worth mentioning. You can often find transcripts for podcasts, news broadcasts, or interviews, which are really helpful for listening practice. You can listen first, then read the transcript to check your understanding. Or if you're struggling, read the transcript first and then listen.
Exactly. Transcripts give you the chance to reinforce what you've heard and help you spot words or phrases you might have missed. And there are some audio players out there that sync the transcript with the audio, so you can follow along as you listen.
Oh, I love that feature. It's so useful for catching tricky words or understanding fast speech. Another thing that can be super helpful is listening with a variety of playback environments, like using different headphones or even a speaker. The way you hear things can change depending on the audio quality.
That's true. Sometimes switching up the audio environment makes a big difference in how clear the speech sounds. You might catch something with headphones that you didn't hear through speakers, and vice versa.
Exactly. And we haven't even talked about language exchange or conversation practice. There are so many opportunities now to connect with native speakers and practice your listening in real time. It's a great way to get more exposure to natural conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Practicing with a native speaker gives you that real world experience you can't always get from listening to pre recorded audio. Plus, you can ask questions in real time, which is so helpful.